The last time I stepped into my father's office, I was 22 and my heart was so full of hope it felt like a physical weight in my chest. I had just graduated with top honors in architecture, my diploma still crisp in its tube. I remember the smell of his office, rich leather, and expensive cleaner. I placed my offer letter from Aura Design, a small firm dedicated to green building, right on his immaculate desk. He didn't even glance down. He just stared out his giant window at the city skyline, a view he loved more than anything. He let out a long, weary sigh. "So, you've chosen to be a professional hobbyist," he said. His voice was so cold and flat, it stole the air from my lungs. He told me my passion for sustainable architecture was an embarrassment to the family name, a frivolous pursuit for people who didn't understand real business. His final words that day carved a hole in my soul I didn't think would ever heal. "If you walk out that door, Abigail, don't expect a safety net. You will drown, and I won't be there to watch." I walked out, and the heavy door clicked shut behind me, sounding final. I took the job anyway. My new office was a drafty loft above a bakery with a constant, confusing smell of old coffee and fresh paint. The floorboards creaked, and in the winter, we could see our breath sometimes. My starting salary was so small that I had to make impossible choices, like between getting my car's brakes fixed or buying groceries for the week. I survived on cheap noodles and thrift store clothes. But I loved the work. For the first time, I felt a real purpose, a fire in my belly. I was designing buildings that worked with the environment, not against it. I was creating spaces that breathed. I was poor in my father's eyes, but I felt a different kind of rich, a deep satisfaction he could never price tag. My colleagues were like a new family, united by a mission he could never understand. We believed we were building the future, one efficient window at a time. While my father's company, Stoneworth International, built identical glass towers that guzzled energy and ignored the sun, I became an expert in efficiency. I buried myself in research, learning everything I could about geothermal heating, solar power integration, and smart materials that adapted to the weather. I spent my nights reading dense technical reports and my days running complex energy models on a slow computer. My father saw my life as a tragic failure, a waste of my education. But I was becoming an expert in the one thing that would soon change the entire industry. While he was looking up at his skyscrapers, I was looking at the ground beneath them, at the sun above them. We were the quiet, hard-working engine of a revolution he was too arrogant to see coming. He was the past, and I was quietly, patiently building the future. On my 20th birthday, I felt a surge of pride so strong it brought tears to my eyes. I had just finished my first solo project, a small community library that produced its own energy. Seeing the solar panels on the roof and knowing what was inside felt better than any A I'd ever received. Hoping to bridge the icy gap between us, I bought my dad a beautiful, expensive pen from a store I could barely afford. I went to his house, my hands trembling, but he wasn't home. His assistant, looking uncomfortable, told me he was at a last-minute business dinner. He had forgotten my birthday again. I left the carefully wrapped gift on his doorstep with a short, hopeful note. I waited for weeks, checking my phone constantly, but I never received a thank you or even a simple phone call. The silence was its own answer. Thanksgiving that year was the worst. The house was filled with family, the table overflowing with food. My uncle, trying to be nice, asked me how work was going. Before I could even open my mouth, my father laughed loudly, a harsh sound that cut through the chatter. "Abigail? She's still playing with her recycled cardboard models," he said, waving a hand dismissively. The whole table went quiet. He then spent the next 10 minutes explaining to my wide-eyed young cousins what a failed investment looked like, all while looking directly at me, a cold smirk on his face. I felt my cheeks burn. I mumbled an excuse and left the table, locking myself in the downstairs bathroom. I cried silent, hot tears, the sound of their uncomfortable laughter and resumed conversations echoing through the floor, a constant reminder of my place in his world. One rainy Monday, my boss, Elena, called me into her small, cluttered office. Her face was serious. She told me a massive, secretive investment firm, Vertex Properties, needed a consultant for a highly confidential project. They wanted someone brilliant, innovative, but completely unknown in commercial circles. They had done their research and chosen me. This was it. My chance to work on a scale I'd only dreamed of, to prove my ideas on a grand stage, all while staying in the shadows. I felt a dizzying mix of terror and excitement I hadn't felt in years. This was the opportunity that could change everything, and the pressure felt immense. I left her office, the rain pattering against the window, my future suddenly looking as stormy and unpredictable as the weather outside. I worked day and night on the first Vertex project. It was an old, failing office building downtown that everyone had written off. My design was radical. It used special new windows and a hidden geothermal system. I had mapped out myself to cut its energy costs by over half. The day I presented the plans to the anonymous Vertex board on a secured video call, my palms were sweating. The silence on their end after I finished was terrifying, stretching on for an eternity. Then the lead voice, mechanically disguised, simply said, "Proceed. Full budget is approved. No questions, no arguments. Just complete trust." It was the most validating and powerful moment of my entire career. I had done it. I had convinced the most demanding audience imaginable, all from my creaky chair in the drafty loft. Weeks later, I was at a city planning meeting, representing Vertex without using my name, just as a sustainability consultant. I was sitting in the back, taking notes, when my father walked in with his team. He was there to pitch a new, traditional development, another glass box. He saw me sitting alone in the back and later cornered me in the hallway during a break. "Still scrounging for table scraps, Abigail?" he asked, shaking his head with a look of pity that felt like a slap. He had no idea I was actually there to judge his project, to help write the report that would determine its fate. The folder containing my preliminary assessment of his proposal was right there in my bag, feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. The city rejected my father's project. The planning committee chairman called it environmentally regressive and out of touch with modern standards and citizen expectations. I was in the room when they told him, watching from my seat in the corner. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He argued, his voice rising, about profit margins and square footage, but it was useless. The world was changing, and he was being left behind. He was so angry, he never even glanced my way. He had no idea that the specific report they were quoting from, the one that dismantled his proposal point by point, was one I had secretly written for Vertex. The pen might not have been mightier than the sword, but it was certainly mightier than his ego that day. After that, Vertex began aggressively buying up all the prime properties my father was after. Our retrofitted, green buildings were like magnets, attracting all the top tenants with their promises of lower operating costs and a better public image. Stoneworth International started to struggle publicly. Their old-fashioned towers were suddenly too expensive to run, and companies began breaking leases to move into our buildings. For the first time, I saw a real, visible crack in my father's empire, a hairline fracture in his foundation of concrete and steel. I was the one, silently and from a distance, who had put it there. Every news article about Stoneworth's declining profits was a silent testament to the value of the very principles he had mocked. My mom called me one evening, her voice tight with worry. "Your father's under a lot of pressure," she said, sounding tired. "The board is questioning his leadership. He wants to have lunch with you this week." I agreed, a small, naive part of me hoping for a truce, for him to finally see me as an adult. But at the fancy restaurant, he didn't ask about my life or my work. He just ranted about Vertex, this soulless, faceless corporation that was ruining everything he had built. He was spiraling. He told me I was lucky I was too small and insignificant for a company like that to ever notice or crush. I just sipped my water, the ice clinking in the glass, and said nothing, letting his words wash over me. He was building his own coffin and didn't even know it. The following week, Elena called me back into her office. She had a strange smile on her face. Vertex was so impressed with my work on the downtown project and the ones that followed, they wanted to formalize our relationship. They offered to make me a silent partner. They put an incredible deal on the table, company equity, a huge share of the profits, and total creative control over all their future developments. I would become a millionaire overnight, but my name would be nowhere on the official paperwork. I was to remain a ghost. I signed the thick stack of legal documents with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking, my signature looking unfamiliar on the pristine pages. My life had changed in an instant, a seismic shift that, from the outside, left no visible trace. I made a conscious decision to keep my new wealth a complete secret. I still drove my rust-spotted old car and lived in my small, sunlit apartment with the noisy pipes. I didn't want the giant house or the flashy clothes my father valued. I wanted the security, the freedom, and the power to make a real difference on my own terms. The only thing I splurged on was getting my mom a much-needed, expensive medical procedure she'd been putting off. I told her a white lie, that I had won a special, anonymous industry grant to cover it. Seeing the relief on her face was worth more than any sports car. It was the first time my secret power felt good, felt right. A month later, my dad showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Sunday morning. I was in my pajamas. He said the family was having an intervention about my life choices. He, my mom, and my brother all filed in and sat on my worn-out sofa, their postures stiff. They told me, with sad faces, that they were worried I was throwing my life away, that I was stuck. My father looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's not too late to turn things around. I can get you a receptionist position at Stoneworth. You'd have a steady paycheck." It was the cruelest, most condescending form of kindness he could have offered. He was offering me a seat at the bottom of his sinking ship, and he thought he was throwing me a life preserver. The final straw came at my grandfather's retirement party. It was a huge event at a country club. My father gave a long, polished speech. He talked about legacy, about success, about building something that lasts. He praised my grandfather's business acumen. Then, as a supposed joke, he said, "And then there's my daughter, Abigail. She reminds us that not everyone is cut out for this life. She's chasing her dreams." The entire room, filled with his business associates and our extended family, turned to stare at me. I felt my face burn with a humiliation so deep I thought I might vanish. The pitying looks, the muffled chuckles, it was unbearable. That was the moment. Something in me finally broke for good, and the pieces solidified into something harder and stronger. I was done. I got the news from a business article online the next morning. Stoneworth was on the verge of total collapse. Their old-fashioned buildings were half empty, and their debts were massive, a noose around the company's neck. The board was in a panic, holding emergency meetings. They were desperately seeking a merger or a buyout to survive, to avoid complete bankruptcy. The article named the only company with the capital, the portfolio, and the strategic desire to save them, Vertex Properties. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. The company he cursed was his only possible salvation, and I was its secret architect. My father, still believing I was a struggling, low-level architect, called me that afternoon. "Abigail," he said, his voice strained and tired, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I hear your firm does some work with Vertex. Do you have any contact over there? A name? An email? Anything at all?" He was pleading. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting him sweat. I told him I might be able to get a message to the right person. The power in that simple, vague sentence felt overwhelming, a physical thrill. I was holding the strings, and he was finally feeling the tug. I immediately spoke to the executive board at Vertex. I told them I wanted to personally handle the Stoworth acquisition and restructure. I laid out my vision for it. They agreed without hesitation, trusting my judgment completely. I then had my new executive assistant, place a call to my father. She was young and professional. She told him, "The principal of Vertex will see you on Friday at 10 a.m. Please be prompt." He was so grateful to her, his voice cracking with relief. He sounded like a broken man. I listened to the recording of the call later, and for a single, fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The morning of the meeting, I stood in my walk-in closet, in an apartment he didn't know I owned. I put on a new custom-tailored suit. It was a deep navy blue, elegant, powerful, and had cost more than my first car. I looked in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were steady. Her posture was straight. She was calm. She was in complete control. She was no longer the little girl begging for her father's approval or crying in bathroom stalls. She was a force of nature, and she was ready to reclaim her narrative. I arrived early at the Vertex conference room, a stunning, airy space on the top floor of a building I had designed. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city he once thought he ruled. I watched the tiny cars and people below, thinking about every insult, every dismissive comment, every time he made me feel small and foolish for believing in something different. I thought about the forgotten birthdays and the public humiliations. But I didn't feel angry anymore. The fire had burned down to embers, leaving a quiet, solid readiness. This was the end of his story about me, and the beginning of my own. I was about to write the final chapter. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard a nervous, tentative knock on the conference room door. My stomach fluttered for just a second, a last remnant of the old me. This was it. The moment where my two worlds, kept meticulously separate for years, were about to collide in a cataclysm my father could never have imagined in his wildest nightmares. I took a deep, calming breath, straightened the already straight papers in front of me, and steadied my voice. It was time. "Come in," I said, my voice clear and firm, echoing slightly in the quiet room. The heavy door swung open. My father walked in first, followed by his nervous-looking CFO. He was already mid-bow, his shoulders hunched, his body language oozing a false, desperate confidence. He was trying to play the part of the humble supplicant. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice," he began, not even looking up from the polished floor. "We are so eager to discuss how Stoworth can be of service to Vertex." Then he finally looked up, his eyes traveling from the empty chair at the head of the table to the person sitting in it. His gaze met mine. The performance was over. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. His CFO, a man named Mr. Evans, looked back and forth between us, his face a mask of complete and utter confusion. Abigail, my father finally whispered, my name a choked, disbelieving sound on his lips. I gestured gracefully to the two empty chairs directly across from me. Hello, Frank, I said, my voice steady and calm, devoid of any emotion. Please have a seat. Let's talk about your future. I watched, my heart pounding a steady, victorious rhythm in my chest, as the man who told me I would die poor realized, with dawning horror, that his entire financial survival was entirely, unquestionably, in my hands. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the situation crush him. Then I slid a single piece of paper across the gleaming surface of the table. It was a job offer. The role was Director of Legacy Properties. It was a real, demanding job with a solid salary, but he would be reporting directly to me. His job would be to implement my green designs for his old, failing buildings. I wasn't giving him a handout or a pity role. I was giving him a chance to learn, from the daughter he'd scorned, how the world actually worked now. The utter, profound humiliation in his eyes, the way his hands trembled as he picked up the paper, was a more powerful and satisfying victory than any amount of money in my bank account. This was the reckoning. He took the job. He had no other choice. The first time he had to call me Ms. Walker in a team meeting, I saw the last vestige of his pride shatter behind his eyes. But something else happened, too, something I hadn't fully anticipated. As he worked on my projects, he started to see that my work had real, quantifiable value. He began, slowly and grudgingly, to understand the science and the logic behind the designs he had once mocked. We never became the close father and daughter from storybooks, but we found a new, hard-won respect built on the foundation of my success. The day my retrofit of his flagship Stoneworth Tower won a prestigious national award, he sent me a simple, 3-line email. It read, "You were right. I was wrong. I'm proud of you." It wasn't the sweeping apology I had dreamed of as a girl, but it was a start. He thought signing his paycheck was my revenge, but he was wrong. My real victory was finally, after all these years, getting him to truly see me. Has anyone taken credit for your work? Has anyone ever stole your whole project or work? What did you do to get it all back? Share in the comments section.